How's it going, everybody? Hey, this is Mr. Smith. It's February 17th, 2022. We were unable to have class this morning because of the snow. So these up and coming videos that I'm going to be posting will be replacements for today's class. I'm going to be posting 3 videos. All of them are short videos here on YouTube. The first 2 videos will deal with the defense of the Christian faith, and the last video will deal with the ending to Luke's gospel. When you come to class next week in person, I'm going to give you a quiz at the beginning of class over these 3 videos. If you watch these videos and you just understand the content and you're taking notes, then you're going to be prepared to take the quiz next week. Next week, for the quiz at the start of class, I'm going to allow this one to be open notes. Okay? We will have a quiz at the end of class as we normally do, which means next week we're going to have 2 quizzes, one at the start and one at the end. The one at the start will cover these 3 videos. By the way, if you're watching this video and you're tuning in from church, I pray that you're blessed by the content and you're really challenged to grow in what you believe as well. So, with that being said, there's 3 things we're going to cover today. First, I want to give a definition between objective truth and a definition for subjective truth. That's the first thing that we're going to do. That's going to be a quiz question. The next thing that we have to do is identify what is the most important question that we should ask in order to determine the rest of what we believe. So what you believe always comes down to the root of one question and one answer. We're going to review that as well. And then the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to show how when you answer that first and most critical question one way, it determines all the rest of your beliefs. So with that being said, let's start with objective truth. Objective truth is something that is true for all people, no matter what their culture or their religious beliefs. These truths are fundamental and they are absolute in nature. Maybe you could just say they're true for all people, all cultures, all time periods. They're just factual. But subjective truth, something that's subjective, is the opposite. It's something that is true purely for the individual, regardless of the facts or evidences. These truths are relative and opinionated in nature. So here's the idea. 1, objective truth is based on fact and it's true for everyone. Subjective truth is based on feelings or emotions or opinion, and it's not true for everyone. So that's your first quiz question. You need to know the difference between objective and subjective truth. The second question that we're going to be working with is this, or the second aspect of this video, is really what is the most important question that we need to be asking as we determine what we believe. John chapter 18 verses 33 through 38 show us this famous scene where Jesus has been arrested by the Jewish people because they're rejecting him as their Messiah, and they're handing him over to Pilate, the Roman governor who's in charge of the area of Jerusalem at the time. Jesus is being put on trial before Pilate, the Roman governor, and Pilate is testing Jesus out to see if he's done anything wrong, and he's wanting to hear Jesus' testimony. Look at John chapter 18, verse 33. Therefore, Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, and this is what he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. It's not of this world." Look at verse 37. Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify, to bear witness in the courtroom about the truth. Everyone who is of the truth belongs to the truth, has possession of the truth." Look at the rest of the verse. "Hears my voice, senses my leading, my conviction, understands who I am." Look at verse 38. Pilate, the Roman governor, then says to him, "What is truth?" Now, as Christians, what Christians believe is that truth is right in front of Pilate. Truth is less of an idea, and truth is a person. So that being said, the Gospels present this to us, that the most critical question to ask is, what is truth? Or maybe in synonym-like form, the question would be, does God exist? What you're really asking, you are asking a question based on what is ultimately real, what is ultimate reality. So while the question can be phrased in a number of ways, the nature of the question only has one nature. Here's the idea. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Is anything ultimately real? If you begin with what is truth, and if you answer that first question, well, truth is that God exists, then all the other major questions in life flow from your belief that God exists. If you ask the question, what is truth, and you land on the idea that God does not exist, then your belief as an atheist, or maybe an agnostic, will then match how you answered that first question. All the other major questions of life, if you remain consistent, you also have to answer the same way. So with that being said, maybe you could write this down in your notes. The most critical question that a person needs to ask in order to determine what they believe is, what is truth, or does God exist? So let's then work here. After you have asked the first major question on truth, the next thing that we need to do is ask, what is the second question? The second question would be, how did our physical world come into existence? If my first question pertains to ultimate reality, then my second question should pertain to physical reality. What do I believe about this physical world that I am living on? The third question would be this: how did people get here? It's a question of origin. Where did I come from? The next important question to ask, the fourth question, would be, what is the purpose of all human beings? What is the meaning of life? The fifth question would be, is there a moral standard of living that all should live by? Is there a moral standard that all people for all time, all cultures should live by? And then the last question, the sixth question, at least the last question for today, is what will happen to people after death? That's a question of destiny. So write this down. Here are the 6 major questions. The first one is, what is ultimate reality? Does truth exist? Does God exist? The second one is, what is the nature of physical reality? What do I believe about this world? The third is origin. How did I get here? Where did I come from? The next is meaning, or what is my purpose in life? The next is morality. How should I live in life? And the last is destiny. Where am I going in life? Ultimate reality, physical reality, origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Okay, so let's just work with these a little bit. If you are someone who begins by saying that God does not exist, what is truth? And for you, you begin with, well, God doesn't exist. That's ultimately real to me. Ultimate reality is God doesn't exist. So you move on to the next question. Well, if God doesn't exist, then what do I believe about the physical world that I'm living on? You would likely say that the world came about by an accidental explosion or by the means of evolution. So if there is no designer or organizer or creator, then you believe you live on something that was basically the product of an accident. Okay? If we're going to remain logically consistent, then we have to go with this. If you say God doesn't exist, if you say that the world and all things in it are accidental because of evolution, then how do you answer the question about origin? Your answer, if you're going to remain consistent, is that human beings evolved from this explosion. Maybe you could say that human beings evolved at one point from stardust. You know, stars bump into stars and they exploded, and suddenly dust became some form of ooze, and ooze became some form of fish, and fish became some form of man. Obviously, I'm leaving out a lot of the argumentation, but the basic idea is that you would have to say an individual person's origin started with an explosion or started with dust. Continuing on, if we were to think about it, which by the way also just means that you believe humans are merely physical, there's no soul, there's no spiritual side to them, there's no immaterial side to them. You would just believe they are made out of dust, and then you would believe that they are merely and only physical. If you remain consistent, God doesn't exist, the world's an accident, I am an accident, then that means that human beings possess no ultimate purpose. Here it is, back to our definitions to begin with. You, if you're going to remain consistent, would have to say that human beings can only possess subjective purpose. They cannot possess objective purpose. They can only possess subjective purposes. Moving on from the meaning of life, we then get to morality. If you say God doesn't exist, if you say the world is accidental, if you say that humans are nothing more than physical dust, if you say that there is no ultimate meaning to life, then remaining consistent, you would also have to say that human beings possess a subjective moral standard. So what you believe is true morally is different from what I morally believe is true, and that's totally fine. I guess you could say that puts you on the same playing field with an Adolf Hitler, because if God doesn't exist, truth doesn't exist, meaning doesn't exist, morality doesn't objectively exist, then what we have is it's my subjective moral opinion versus everybody else's subjective moral opinion. Now, sure, there are certain opinions that are more popular than other opinions. Adolf Hitler's opinion is not as popular, obviously, today, according to the rest of society. Like, everybody would understand, it's wrong to murder Jews and put them in a concentration camp. But if God doesn't exist and we're all accidents and we're living in an accidental world, there's at the end of the day no justification to be different from Adolf Hitler. It's just what you feel is right versus what he feels is right, so you can't call either one wrong. And then the last one would be this: destiny. If God doesn't exist, if the world is accidental, if we've evolved, if humans have no meaning, if there's no moral standard, then human beings possess no future after death. You just die, and this is it. So I would like to propose, as a Christian, and I would like to propose, by way of the messages of the four gospel accounts, that life actually does have more meaning than that. Let's start now with the other side of it. Again, the most critical question is, does God exist? The ultimate reality in my belief system is that God exists, so truth exists. If I say that God exists, then I move to the second question of physical reality, which means if God exists, then this world was his organized design and creation. If God doesn't exist, this is just an accident. If God does exist, then I'm living in such a way where I'm living in his system. I'm living in his world, his truth. Okay, so if God exists, and if I live in an organized world, not just an accidental world, then I move to my third question of origin. Human beings then were created with value and intentionally. If you start with God doesn't exist, then you're just an accident, a result of stardust. If you start with God does exist, then you would have to say, okay, God created the world, therefore he also created me with intention and value. Okay, if God created you with intention and value, that brings us to the fourth one, which is, what is the meaning of life? Human beings possess ultimate meaning under the Christian worldview because God has created you, all people, everywhere, for all time. Their job as image bearers of God is to bring him glory. They aren't to live for themselves, but they are to live in gratitude and thankfulness towards him. You can't be thankful without a source. So we would say that the ultimate meaning of life would be to glorify God. Moving on from the meaning of life, if God exists, if his world is organized, if humans are created with value, if humans have a purpose or a meaning to glorify God, here comes the fifth question of morality. Human beings possess an objective moral standard. If God exists, then things can legitimately be morally right and morally wrong. See, the person who believes that God exists can rightfully say that everything Adolf Hitler did was wrong. The person who believes that God doesn't exist and truth doesn't exist can't make a truth assertion and say that Adolf Hitler was wrong. The only person who can make a truthful assertion about Adolf Hitler's wrongdoings would be the person who starts with God, who then gives moral commands. And we looked at these moral commands in class, the 10 Commandments. a couple of weeks ago, because the Ten Commandments are God's objective, moral set of truths. Moving on from morality, we then move to destiny. If there's an objective moral standard, that means I'm going to be held accountable for that standard, which brings me to destiny. If God exists, then here's the destiny. Human beings possess an absolute future after death. In the Christian worldview, that's obviously heaven or hell. So if God exists, then he created this world. If he created this world, then he created us with value and intentionality by design. If our origin is one where we have value, then we can also know that we've been given a meaning in life to glorify God. If we can glorify God, we glorify God by living rightly, because he's given us an objective moral standard, and that also assumes that this moral lawgiver will hold all people accountable for how they handled this moral law, and that will determine their destiny, what they did with that moral law. Okay? So here's some things that I would like to propose. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, I can still value people, and I can still have a moral standard without God. Of course you can. You're just going to be wildly inconsistent in doing so. I'm not talking about what we think we can do. I'm talking about what we have justification to do. Do we have justification to say that human beings have ultimate value if we don't believe in an ultimate value giver like God? Think about this just for a moment. If I live in a world that came about by an accident, and there was just some big explosion, then what do I do with cockroaches and crickets and frogs and other animals in comparison to myself? I can't rightfully say that I'm more valuable. Objectively speaking, I can't say I'm objectively more valuable than the cockroach that I stepped on the other day. At the end of the day, you can say, or you can believe that you're more valuable. It's just that you don't have the objective truth to stand on in order to support that belief system. So you might say humans are valuable and God doesn't exist. You don't have good reasons to believe so. But the person who says, no, I believe that God exists, the person who says, no, I believe that I'm living in God's system and in God's world, is also the one who can stand on a foundation to say, well, if there's a designer, if there's a value giver, then yeah, humans have value. Why? Not because it's my opinion versus somebody else's opinion, but because God says I'm valuable. So it doesn't matter if people agree or disagree with my value. What he said about me is first true. So the argument that I'm trying to make before you today is this: the beliefs that you hold must remain consistent across the board. How you answer that first question, does God exist, determines how you answer every other major question in life. Again, you can make an assertion, but that doesn't mean that you have ground to stand on in order to make that assertion. With that being said, that concludes the first video. Remember, you're going to be quizzed over objective truth, subjective truth. You're going to be quizzed over the most critical question, and then I'm going to give you a few questions as it pertains to what happens when you answer that critical question one way versus another way. All right, thanks so much. We'll move on to the next video.